The National Society Daughters of the American Revolution was founded on October 11, 1890, during a time in the United States that was marked by a revival in patriotism and intense interest in the beginnings of the United States of America. It was also a time when, similar to our World War II veterans today, many of those with personal connections to the Revolutionary War were passing away. This fueled a small group of patriotic women in our nation's capital to establish a service organization whose mission was to perpetuate the memory and spirit of the men and women who achieved American independence. This organization was the DAR, which set out to honor this legacy through three primary mission areas of historic preservation, education, and patriotism. The DAR has carried the torch of patriotism ever since, promoting and celebrating patriotic anniversaries, and particularly by supporting our nation's military. In more than 130 years of active service to the nation, the objectives of historic preservation, education, and patriotism laid forth in the first meeting of the DAR have remained the same. These stem in part from President George Washington's injunction in his farewell address to the American people, where he said, "To promote as an object of primary importance institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge, thus developing an enlightened public opinion." And separately, from a desire to cherish, maintain, and extend the institutions of American freedom, to foster true patriotism and love of country, and to aid in securing for mankind all the blessings of liberty. DAR members across the country, or daughters as they are affectionately called, have devoted countless hours to carrying out this mission and answering the call to civic duty, and through this devotion have literally changed millions of lives for the better. Across more than 50 focused committees, daughters actively support new citizens, students, men and women in uniform, and veterans in need. Projects also digitize and preserve tens of thousands of records from the Revolutionary War, take measures to preserve grave sites across the country, and to protect thousands of local sites of historic significance that would likely have disappeared long ago were it not for the DAR. The DAR is proud of its legacy of coming to the country's aid in times of emergency and war, and in fact has been of assistance to the United States government in every war in which it has participated. This call to service is rooted in our mandate to never forget those who have made the supreme sacrifice for our country, but also extends to those military members who may not have been wounded in action, may not have been decorated, but who nonetheless courageously heeded their nation's call to duty, wherever their country needed them. While the DAR was still in its infancy, the United States found itself in conflict with Spain in 1898. Dr. Anita Newcomb McGee, then a DAR Vice President General, volunteered the organization to help screen the nurses needed by the government. The DAR Hospital Corps was established and screened thousands of nursing applications within the next few months, sending more than 1,500 nurses to help in the conflict. During the First World War, numerous chapters volunteered their efforts to help. Members of the Cincinnati DAR knitted garments for the troops. Other chapters rolled bandages, collected clothing, and donated food for the USO. The Mercy Warren chapter of Springfield, Massachusetts, hosted first aid classes and fundraisers. After the attacks on Pearl Harbor, the DAR headquarters became a center for wartime activity. Offices throughout the DAR buildings were loaned to the American Red Cross. A day nursery was opened in the basement of Constitution Hall for the children of enlisted men whose wives were working. The DAR members also purchased more than $2 million in war bonds and stamps during the course of the fighting. Through conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East, DAR members passionately lent their support in various ways through monetary donations and volunteer efforts. Following the attack on September 11th, the DAR worked with the Department of the Navy to sponsor the crew of the aircraft carrier USS John S. Stennis. When the ship returned to port, DAR members' support shifted to the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, which cares for wounded military personnel. DAR members also often regularly send care packages to troops overseas. DAR members have also served in all branches of service themselves, including more than 600 members who served in a variety of capacities during World War II and many more who have come after them. The DAR's legacy of support for the United States military was steadfast through the Vietnam War. Although there were several pivotal events that took place from 1967 through 1968 that demonstrate the DAR's commitment to our Vietnam War veterans and highlight the lasting legacy that the war had on the DAR's approach to serving veterans through the stand-up of the DAR Service to Veterans Committee. First, in 1967, then-President General Mrs. William Henry Sullivan, Jr. initiated the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution Dr. Anita Newcomb McGee Award, in honor of the woman who, in 1898, served as director of the DAR Hospital Corps and who initiated the law establishing the U.S. Army Nurse Corps on February 2, 1901. On the 1st of February 1967, President General Sullivan presented this award to Captain Linda A. Bowman, U.S. Army Nurse of the Year, at a ceremony in the main Navy building as part of the 66th anniversary observance of the Army Nurse Corps, and to publicly recognize the vital contribution of Army nurses in caring for sick and injured U.S. servicemen. Captain Bowman also received the Army's plaque and an engraved bowl from the Surgeon General, Lieutenant General Leonard D. Heaton. Captain Bowman was the only child of an infantry soldier killed in action in World War II when she was just 2 years old, and served as the educational coordinator at the 34th General Hospital in Orleans, France. In mid-September the same year, President General Sullivan visited Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland for a visit to cheer up the U.S. Marine battle casualties just back from Vietnam, dubbed at the time the Patriots of '67. The visit supported Operation Appreciation, a program sponsored by the local arm of the Catholic War Veterans of America and initiated by Mr. James Myrna, a former Marine. Operation Appreciation was a home front support program to show Vietnam veterans that they had not been forgotten and that their great personal sacrifices in defense of freedom were appreciated. President General Sullivan was moved by this visit and answered Operation Appreciation's call to show our wounded that their sacrifices were appreciated by making available aid and recreation. Upon her return, she extended the use of the President General's box in Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. to these men and made arrangements with some of the hall's tenants to provide blocks of complimentary tickets to Constitution Hall performances. The NSDAR's participation in Operation Appreciation resulted in many letters of appreciation from servicemen and culminated in the unique opportunity for the President General to travel to Vietnam in 1968. In January of 1968, President General Sullivan first traveled to Hawaii and then on to Saigon in South Vietnam just days before the Tet Offensive. The purpose of the trip was to visit U.S. service members in combat and in evacuation hospitals. Her official itinerary was arranged by General Westmoreland's U.S. Military Assistance Command Vietnam Headquarters in Hawaii and was called a goodwill visit to military personnel and to obtain first-hand information on operations. Although the NSDAR had been of assistance to the United States government in every war in which it had participated, this marked the first time a President General had actually visited a combat area. In Vietnam, President General Sullivan visited 10 sites, including several hospitals and active combat zones. In her diary of the trip, the informative briefings she received left an impression on her, and particularly how each of the commanders she met with were extremely proud of their units and the work that they were accomplishing. She, in turn, sought to give them the assurance and feeling that each of the DAR's then more than 180,000 members were backing them, wished them well, and wished to support them. In a subsequent media interview, Mrs. Sullivan described the somewhat harrowing experience of flying by helicopter to one particular site with enemy combatants visible below, shooting at the aircraft as it went by. After a safe landing, she noted the surprised greeting she received from the troops on the ground. In her own words,
"As we proceeded up the hill, you can imagine the surprise on the faces of the men when they saw two women." And much more the surprise when one of the women was introduced as President General of the DAR. And one of them said, "My goodness, the DAR gets everywhere."
During her visit to Vietnam, President General Sullivan awarded 47 DAR Americanism medals to members of the armed forces selected by their commanding officers. In an address to DAR members following her visit, President General Sullivan noted that she felt very humbled when she witnessed firsthand the many sacrifices these young Americans were making for those on the home front. She admonished members to give their loyalty and support to these soldiers as they strove to carry out their mission. In fact, the visit left a substantial impression on the DAR organization. It increased awareness of the effects of war, of which members observed that there was hardly a family in our country which had not been touched by tragedy. DAR members felt keenly that because the Vietnam War had been unpopular in the eyes of many of the U.S. public, that our service members had not received the honor which their sacrifices deserved. They underscored that those lost in Vietnam had as surely died for their country as did any man in the American Revolution, World War I, World War II, or the Korean conflict. The DAR was determined to make whatever effort it took to show that we do appreciate our Vietnam veterans and that we do share our losses with their loved ones. As a symbolic token of this appreciation, in early 1968, the Chaplain General and chapters across the country began to present certificates of honor to families of young men who had given their lives in Vietnam for their country. This legacy continues today among chapters across the country. One other impression that the war left on the DAR stemmed out of the observation that as the seriousness of the conflict grew, many Americans were going to Vietnam and returning as wounded veterans. Following President General Sullivan's visit to Bethesda Naval Hospital with Operation Appreciation, she put out a call to all states and local chapters to begin their own Operation Appreciation. She noted that the DAR needed to welcome home these servicemen and veterans back into our communities, to let them know that we are proud and happy to have them back with us, and that we needed to help them adjust to civilian life again. This effort was so prolific that it prompted a new DAR committee entitled DAR Service for Veteran Patients that was formally authorized by the DAR in April 1968. Under this committee, DAR members support the United States Veterans Administration by visiting and supporting service members in veterans hospitals throughout the country and doing whatever they can for them, whether it be reading to them, writing letters, serving meals for families, or other service to demonstrate that America is behind them. This support is provided formally through the Veterans Administration Voluntary Service, or VAVS program, and informally by volunteering time to veterans in the VA hospitals and non-VA facilities. Nationally, VAVS has remained at the forefront of progress in the role of the hospital volunteer, from social visitor and group entertainer to a fully integrated member of the medical care team. VA volunteer assignments are defined and supervised by the local hospital or medical center staff, and VA volunteers are present not only at the patient's bedside, but also in clinics and offices, reception areas, libraries, chapels, and even the grounds. Today, DAR is one of the largest groups to serve in VAVS and is a funding partner for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. More than 18,500 DAR volunteers are active in the VA's 170 medical centers and 1,074 outpatient clinics, reflecting nearly 250,000 annual volunteer service hours and donations valued at more than $1 million. Daughters also actively conduct Veterans History Project interviews and support honor flight missions across the country. Whether at home or abroad, the members of the Daughters of the American Revolution serve the country that they love with the same dedication as their revolutionary patriots. Through their continuing efforts to support active duty service members and honor veterans, DAR members are committed to celebrating those who defend our nation's freedom. The DAR honors, respects, and never forgets. Today, the Daughters of the American Revolution, coming full circle 50 years later, are playing a pivotal role in once again joining Americans across the nation in thanking and honoring our Vietnam veterans and their families for their sacrifice and service. Having partnered with the United States of America Vietnam War Commemoration, 2,123 DAR chapters and the National Society have hosted more than 6,500 events, through which we have individually thanked and honored nearly 400,000 Vietnam veterans for their service and sacrifice to the nation. Vietnam veterans have also been presented with Vietnam Veteran lapel pins as a lasting memento of the nation's thanks and a true welcome home. In addition, DAR state regents and local chapters are collaborating with the Vietnam War Commemoration to bestow the new Honorary Partner distinction upon all 47 Vietnam Veterans of America state councils and 601 VVA chapters with the 50 states and the District of Columbia. This noble distinction is conferred only upon organizations made up solely of those who bore the battle of the Vietnam War or those who bore the loss. We are proud to welcome our soldiers back home.